Hello minions, I am starting a new series at a higher level of books. Don't worry, we'll get to the easier ones again, but I do want to get started on this higher level. The first book that we will be doing is The Giver. It's such a fascinating book, so many things to go over, and it is also one of my favorite books. We will divide the book into 4 parts. The first part will be chapters 1 to 5. Let's get started. Ba-bam, bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. Ba-bam. So the first 5 chapters is where we really start to dive into this strange community. The author does a wonderful job subtly telling us about the community without actually telling us what it is. Readers are forced to grab onto these clues, especially in the family gathering where they talk about their dreams and their days and stuff like that. That's where we really start to understand how this community works. We ease into this strange community first with the incident of the plane. It's already peculiar how a plane flying over is considered an emergency, but that doesn't seem too weird as of right now. What really makes us start to think is, what the heck is being released? Though we are immediately told for a contributing citizen to be released from the community was a final decision, a terrible punishment, an overwhelming statement of failure. It is still not clear what the punishment really is. So before we go on any further, here is question 1. There seem to be 3 ways of getting released. What are the 3? Ba-bam. Okay, so punishments exist in this world, so what? I mean, every society has punishments. It starts to really get weird when we learn that children are not born from their parents. In chapter 2, during a family discussion, the narrator says, quote, Jonas remembered when the family received Lily, the day she was named, the day that she had become a one. So we learn that children are given to the families or the parents from the government. The government gives them the children, meaning that the mother does not give birth in this community. Again, I want to point out that instead of the narrator just saying in this community children are given to the parents by the government, the reader simply watched the discussion of the family and just figure out what's going on. It's kind of like when you join a party late and you have no idea what's going on and what the conversation has been about. But after you listen for a while, you start to kind of put the pieces together and kind of understand what's going on. Ba-bam. Alright, so that is a super weird one. There's also some minor facts about the family, how you are only allowed 2 children per household, 1 boy and a girl. Furthermore, which child you get is meticulously chosen by the elders, which we'll talk about a lot more later. Elders literally have control over everything in this community. Continuing on with this theme of lack of agency, as the government literally has control over everything, we learn what Jonas has been apprehensive about. It's a ceremony of the 12s in which children are assigned a job in which they need to do for the rest of their lives. Now, although the job that you get is not completely random, as the elders have watched you throughout your entire life and carefully determining which job would fit you best, this lack of choice surprises us as people living in at least a comparably freer society. Question 2. Why do you think the jobs are chosen by the elders? Think of some of the problems that we have in our society where people are free to choose their own jobs. Ba-bam. Another thing that the author seems to want to tell us is that change is very difficult in this society. Again, in a family discussion where Jonas is worried about his assignment, his father says, quote, there are very rarely disappointments, Jonas. I don't think you need to worry about that. And if there are, you know there's an appeal process. But they all laughed at that. An appeal went to a community for study. Ha 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 ha. So the fact that this is funny clearly shows that changes rarely occur, and any attempt to change or make an appeal is looked upon as a joke. This is typical for governments with a strong central power, as there are so many levels of government, and by the time an appeal goes all the way to a decision-making official, it could literally be years. But I'm not an expert on politics, so let's just move on from that. Ba-bam. Alright, more crazy things about this community. There are no animals here. So there are 2 clues that show us that there are no animals. First, once again in another family discussion, there was a brief joke shared between Jonas and Lily about how some kids were acting like animals. The author states that neither of them knew what the word animal meant, but knew that it was used to describe someone uneducated. So the literal meaning of the word animal in this community has been completely replaced by just the figurative one, where if you call someone an animal, they are considered stupid. Question 3. What is another incident that hints us that there are no animals in this society? Ba-bam. So that is it for today's video, guys. I apologize for not being able to do all chapters 1 to 5. There are just so many things to go over, so we will continue this in part 2 as well as the other chapters. So for part 2, read chapters 6 to 11. Make sure you download the free worksheet in the description below and answer the questions in the comments below. See you in part 2. Hello, minions. Welcome to part 2, chapters 6 to 11. Let's get started. Ba-bam, bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. Ba-bam. So I want to go over a little bit of the ending of part 1 because we didn't get to do that on the first part. So I want to introduce the theme of sameness. It does start to come out a little bit in the first part, so I want to go over that very quickly. Although we are yet to find out how this is done, we find out that almost everyone has dark eyes. Jonas unfortunately has pale eyes, and I say unfortunately because being different seems to be frowned upon in this community. Even Lily says that Jonas has funny eyes, which she's really not supposed to do because rudeness is a big crime in this society. Ba-bam. In chapter 5, we get a brief talk about the stirrings. Almost at the age of 12, Jonas, as well as the others, are starting to become not only physically but emotionally adults. Hence, Jonas shares that he's starting to get this romantic feeling towards his friend Fiona. Though Jonas is worried, thinking that he's gonna get in trouble for just having a dream, his parents assures him that there's nothing to be worried about, this is perfectly normal, all you need to do is just take a pill for the rest of your life, no biggie. Clearly, we're really starting to see the level of control that this society has. We can only guess that the founding fathers of this community thought that having romantic feelings just always led to problems. I mean, it does. We can see examples of that happening in everyday lives of our own. Also, this perfectly complements with the no child rule. Since all children are or supposed to be created in a controlled environment, it would be problematic if families started to have kids on their own. Question 1. Tell me in your own words, why do you think the stirrings need to be cured with this drug? Ba-bam. Okay, so there's not too much to go over during the ceremony, at least in my opinion, so we're going to skip to the part where Jonas becomes a receiver of memory. Brief question. Question 2. How does the community react when Jonas is assigned the receiver of memory? What does this tell you about this role? Ba-bam. Okay, so once these newly 12s are given their jobs, they are given a folder. Now, the rules and instructions for James's folder does seem a little bit strange, but one thing shocks him the most particularly. Question 3. Which rule shocks him the most? Why does he feel this way about this rule? Ba-bam. Next, Jonas's training begins. Now, this seems to be the magical element of this book because up until now, everything, although strange, does seem possible with enough technological advancements. But giving and receiving memory, that just sounds completely supernatural. For Jonas's first memory, he receives sledding down a snowy hill. There are 3 parts to this memory: the snow, the cold, and the hill. The crazy part is that we have dove even further into this community's obsession with sameness. Jonas has never experienced cold, snow, nor even a hill. The community got rid of all these variations in life and just made everything just right. With some crazy futuristic scientific technological innovation, this community has figured out how to completely control climate. They also got rid of hills, and I suppose any kind of geographic variations are also gone, so I'm assuming mountains don't exist as well. Question 4. What are some benefits of having complete climate control? Ba-bam. Alright, I think that was a short part. That's why I added some from part 1. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching part 2. Like always, the worksheet is in the description below. For part 3, read chapters 12 to 17. Hello, minions. Welcome to part 3, chapters 12 to 17. Let's get started. Ba-bam, bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. Ba-bam. Alright, in chapter 12, we finally refer back to the strange incident with the changing apple that came out in part 1. In part 1, the narrator really didn't give us enough information about what the change was. I think that was on purpose so that the readers are completely confused as to like, what do you mean it changed? There's no detail about how it changed. Now, the change happens again in chapter 12 before the session with the giver. This time it wasn't an apple though, it was Fiona's hair. The author purposely puts the readers in Jonas's perspective, making the readers just as confused as Jonas as to what this change is. But after asking the giver the question, we finally understand what this change is. Color. What? They don't even have color? I mean, why not? If everything has to be the same, color definitely cannot exist. As described by the giver, Jonas is starting to see the color red. This was also what the giver was talking about when he said that the receiver of memory must be able to see beyond. Well, we finally understand what that is. It's the ability to see color. Jonas seems to have this gift, or let's say a burden, since being different is not very good in this society. So this time, without actually getting any new memories, he seems to have this innate ability to see color, at least a little bit. Alright, question 1. What is wrong with color? What are some problems that we have today by having the choice of color in our society? Ba-bam! After receiving quite a few of these memories, Jonas is starting to really dislike his community's lack of choice. But at the same time, Jonas acknowledges that choices can be bad as wrong choices can have consequences. He also describes the ability to choose one's job as frightening. He says, quote, "We need to protect people from wrong choices," which is exactly what the community is doing. Ba-bam. In chapter 13, we begin to see the lonely side of being the receiver of memory. Jonas feels quite isolated as he has no one to share his world with. Nobody would understand. He even attempts it by talking about flowers with Asher and elephants with Lily, but it's obviously no use. Continuing on with this theme of loneliness, the giver tells Jonas that although he is allowed to have a spouse, it's going to be very difficult. Question 2. Why would it be so difficult for Jonas to have a spouse, according to the giver? Ba-bam. Chapter 14, Jonas is finally given a truly painful memory. It is the memory of a broken leg. By giving the pleasurable memory of sledding and turning it into a painful experience, Jonas is starting to understand that pleasurable experiences can often lead to pain, meaning wherever pleasure exists, there is a possibility of pain as well. This is obviously true with many pleasurable experiences that we have in our world. Think about that. Ba-bam. Shortly after receiving some of these painful memories, Jonas complains about the role of the receiver. He questions why someone needs to hold these memories. Question 3. How do these painful memories allow the giver to help the community? Ba-bam. Now then, the following question would be, why does one person need to hold all of these memories? Why can't it be shared with everyone? The giver explains that as much as having these memories can be pleasurable, it is just as, not if more, painful. Meaning the receiver's job is to hold these painful memories so that everyone else can live a carefree life. This way, whenever they need wisdom, they can just go to the receiver to ask for advice. Since the receiver is the all-knowing being and the others wouldn't even understand anyways, the receiver doesn't even have to explain why. Whatever he says is the way to go. There was one particular example where the community wanted to increase the population and asked the giver for the advice. The giver advised not to, and he was thinking about the possibility of hunger. But the community members would not understand that because they have no idea what hunger is. The word just doesn't even exist to them. Ba-bam. The final part to go over for part 3 is chapter 16. Jonas receives the ultimate memory, the memory of love. The giver and Jonas discuss how there are no practical uses of love. In fact, it is practically inefficient to have love, like the example of taking care of the grandparents that they were talking about. Hence, probably the reason why the community got rid of it. Despite these inconveniences, Jonas states that he enjoys this feeling of love. And with the help of the giver, they describe the feeling as more complete. Similar to our description of love, the two find it difficult to logically understand, but concludes that it is nice to feel. Now, there is a problem. Jonas has been given the memory of love, but feels a sense of loss when he talks about love with his family. Question 4. Why does Jonas feel a sense of loss when he discusses love with his family? Ba-bam. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. That is part 3 of The Giver. Please finish the book and come back next time for the final part of The Giver. Hello minions, this is the 4th and final part of The Giver, chapters 18 to 23. Let's get started. Ba-bam, bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. Ba-bam. Chapter 13 begins where Jonas asks the giver a question about being released. One thing led to another. The giver finally tells Jonas what happened with the previous receiver. Her name was Rosemary. The giver explains that just like Jonas, Rosemary was a curious receiver, eager to learn all these new memories. However, just like Jonas, her excitement ends when she receives the painful memories. In fact, she seems to have taken it worse than Jonas as she applies for release, knowing what release is, and for her, it would be suicide. Jonas, as well as the readers, finally understand what release really is, which is death, through watching Jonas's father release one of the little twins. Jonas is terrified knowing his father just murdered a small little child. Now, the problem is that only the receiver truly understands the concept of death. To the rest of the community, including Jonas's father, it's simply just called released. So, question 1, why do you think the community calls it release instead of death or even killing? Ba-bam. Okay, so now I think that just drew the line, not only for Jonas, but for many of the readers as well. Jonas's entire journey of training to be the next receiver has been a moral dilemma between freedom and control. We have seen countless examples of this. For example, how he wants the choice of color, but when it comes to choosing the job, he thinks not having a choice would be more ideal. But when he realizes that release is death, he loses all faith in his community. The good thing for Jonas, however, is that in chapter 18, the giver gets an idea. He says that if Jonas disappeared from this community, all the memories that he received throughout the year would be released back into the community. Although it would be complete chaos, it would mean that the community could finally feel again with the help of the giver, of course. Question 2, why can't the giver go away with Jonas? Ba-bam. Now, I do want to point out that in the matter of several hours, from the moment Jonas finally understands what release is to making his decision to leave the community, he is a completely different person. I think this is a big deal. Like, think about it. He doesn't even look back. He instantly says he thinks he could do it, even though it means that he will never be able to see his family or friends ever again. Now, this could have been a smaller build-up over the course of the year throughout his receiver training. There have been a few scenes where he has been described to be lonely or feel alienated. Perhaps it was when he asked his parents if they loved him, where he realized that this wasn't a true family. He no longer felt connected to his household, or maybe he never had felt connected because he would have never known what love meant in the first place. Or it was the fact that his own father murders children that really made him turn against his family. Though his father does not know anything, he's merely just doing his job. To Jonas, he is simply a murderer. Another thing to mention is that although the two, the giver and Jonas, have the same plan, they have different motives, at least in my opinion. Though this may be my personal interpretation of the story, I think Jonas is leaving for himself. I think he just simply lost faith in his community. The narrator also says, quote, "It was possible what they had planned, barely possible. If it failed, he would very likely be killed. But what did that matter? If he stayed, his life was no longer worth living." His life was no longer worth living. The giver, on the other hand, is quite different. He seems to be doing this not only for Jonas, but for the entire community. He wants the community to feel again. This is also the reason why the giver cannot go with Jonas. He understands that if he disappeared as well, the entire community would be in complete chaos and would not be able to survive. Another example we can know that Jonas doesn't care about his community anymore is that he asks the giver to come with him, ignoring the consequences of the giver not being there. Ba-bam. Okay, chapter 21, the plan does not go as planned, as Jonas's father states that Gabriel will be released the next morning. Now, it's hard to know if the author is purposely villainizing the father, or we are just seeing him in a different way because now we know that he kills children. The father seems really evil when he says this. "Even I voted for Gabriel's release when we had the meeting this afternoon. And the reason why he decided to release the child was because he cried all night. Anyways, in the attempt to save Gabriel, he leaves earlier than expected and takes Gabriel with him." Okay, that's pretty much the end of the story, so let's get into the essay. Ba-bam. Let me read the prompt. In The Giver, the community is built on the principles of sameness, control, and the elimination of pain and choice. So in this essay, you're going to analyze why a society might choose to create such a highly controlled community. Like, as in, could this ever happen and why would they make it? So there are only two things to talk about for this essay. The first thing is what fears or values could drive this decision. So let's think about what kind of fears could create a society. So obvious ones are pain, right? So people don't want pain. People have a fear of pain, a fear of death, fear of war, these conflicts. Okay, these are what people are afraid of. There are some values that also drive this decision. Things like inequality, right? So people want equality. In order to have true equality, everything must be the same. That's why they got rid of colors, which obviously signals racial inequality, like racism. Then you're going to talk about the potential benefits of the society, which is pretty much the same thing, in my opinion, because as you talk about the fears and values, you're at the same time, you'll be talking about how it's good not to have these things. And number two, do you think a society like this could ever be justified? Meaning, can we say that because of these benefits, such society could be ideal? Right? Like, would you want a society like this? Would it ever be okay to have a society like Jonas's? Ba-bam. All right, guys, that is the essay and the giver. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you watched through the entire thing. I had so much fun reading this book again and really diving into all the specific details. Like always, the worksheets are in the link in the description below, and if you really did write the essay, you can send it to me on my email, which will be in the link in the description as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next book. Bye bye. Ba bam bam. Ba bam ba bam. Ba bam bam. Ba bam ba bam. Ba bam bam. Ba bam ba bam. Ba bam.